Good afternoon. We are reconvening the Energy and Technology Committee's meeting on the presentation of the Hydrogen Task Force recommendations. As you will recall, we have heard from two different panels now. We'll hear from Commissioner Dykes from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and then we will return to the Q&A that we were on the brink of starting before we recessed at noon. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So I just wanted to give a quick intro for the context on the important role that the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has played throughout the process of the task force. Both Commissioner Dykes and her staff were provided invaluable input with regards to the hydrogen policy, technology, and federal engagement. And the two panels that you've already heard from really have been focused on the activities of the hydrogen task force. But in this section, we did want to ensure that the committee had the opportunity to hear about several other key hydrogen-related initiatives that are underway throughout the state. So thank you, Commissioner Dykes.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And I just will take a minute to really commend, first off, the legislature for establishing this task force, as well as the Green Bank team for facilitating the task force effort. I think you guys did a phenomenal job of providing for a really inclusive and robust discussion and organization of lots of different viewpoints from diverse stakeholders to inform this report. So we were glad to be a part of it. This is really amazing to think about how much has been happening in the hydrogen space just over the period of the year since this bill passed to establish the working group. In that time, of course, DEEP has been actively participating in the Hydrogen Task Force. In addition, we also launched the Comprehensive Energy Strategy process under Public Act 1180. DEEP authors a Comprehensive Energy Strategy once every 4 years, plus or minus, to tackle issues like this of how to ensure that the state is well positioned from a policy, incentive, a market, a workforce perspective to be able to incorporate emerging technologies like hydrogen in a way that achieves and aligns with the various goals that we have around cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy sources. So as part of the CES development process, DEEP held a variety of technical sessions, including a technical session in April of last year that was focused specifically on hydrogen opportunities. And then we participated in, with the benefit of the input we got in that technical session that informed our participation in the hydrogen task force established under Special Act 22-8. And we are working on a white paper that will be coming out that reflects all the input that we got on the Comprehensive Energy Strategy process. So we're not kind of waiting to finalize the whole CES, but where there are some of these timely topics like hydrogen opportunities, we're creating white papers to put out for public comment that enable us to get our concepts and learnings out to the public and to stakeholders as we have them and in time to inform some of the key funding opportunities that we're pursuing on hydrogen at the federal level. A critical component of the white paper that is forthcoming is a proposed clean hydrogen definition for Connecticut. We think that stakeholder feedback is really critical to getting this definition right, and the definitions is tended to really try to create that alignment. I highlight that alignment for this emerging resource that addresses many of the different stakeholder considerations that we received. Based on the stakeholder feedback on the white paper, we'll be finalizing the white paper later this year and incorporate it into the final Comprehensive Energy Strategy. Our hope is that with that information, we'll be able to develop a clean hydrogen roadmap for Connecticut after the finalization of the white paper. Of course, all of these are intended as tools to gather up information. And I know that many of the opportunities that we're hearing about will be things that ultimately will be in the legislature's hand to determine what the best pathway is for the state. So we see this Comprehensive Energy Strategy process as really us trying to build a record, an inclusive record, and provide for some recommendations and ultimately potentially inform some legislative proposals for next year. In the meantime, we have the incredible good fortune with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law and now the Inflation Reduction Act to have an unprecedented amount of federal funding that is become available to advance hydrogen across the country. And we are actively working with New York, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Rhode Island on a multi-state proposal to become one of up to 10 federally funded regional clean hydrogen hubs. This is a program and a competitive, it's going to be a highly competitive funding opportunity that was created under the bipartisan infrastructure law. The U.S. Department of Energy is going to be administering $8 billion to award to these hydrogen hubs across the country. And I can say that this has catalyzed activity on the national level, but especially here at the regional level. It's unprecedented to have this amount of coordination going on among our states, and it's really accelerated our understanding of opportunities for partnerships around hydrogen deployment in the Northeast. We expect that under the federal Hydrogen Hub program that the U.S. Department of Energy will award up to $1.25 billion in federal funding for each selected hub. And there is an expectation of a 50% match. So that 1.25 billion will ultimately be reflect at a minimum 2.5 billion of federal and then other matching funds to accelerate a hydrogen hub. So what's a hydrogen hub? Maybe that's a good thing to start with. As we understand it, it's really intended. I think what the department is looking to see is that you have states working together to create kind of the first steps, the first foundation of what can be a thriving market and infrastructure investment to catalyze the production, distribution, and utilization of hydrogen in a region. And so this is not R&D funding. It's really intended to fund sort of early commercial deployment opportunities for hydrogen in the region. And so our focus here in the Northeast is really looking at opportunities to deploy green, clean hydrogen production and focusing on hard to decarbonize sectors as end users of hydrogen. And so all of the planning that we've been doing and stakeholder engagement around decarbonization efforts in the various Northeast states that have policy goals like our Global Warming Solutions Act is really informing the discussions and the planning in the hub states about those opportunities for end uses that could really benefit from a hard to decarbonize standpoint. So for example, aviation, maritime, long distance trucking are examples of parts of our economies that we share here in the Northeast where electrification has, may not be as easy to accomplish as a pathway for decarbonization, where we're looking at other alternatives, and the hydrogen solution is promising there. We submitted a concept paper to the Department of Energy last November, and it was really exciting. During the holidays, we got word back from the Department of Energy that the Northeast Hub concept was green lighted to move forward to the next step. To be able to submit an application to the Department of Energy, and that application is due on April 7th. So we are working fast and furious to identify and develop this application. And I'm really encouraged by the coordination that's going on. Where our New York counterparts at NYSERDA have been dedicating a lot of staffing and consultant support to help facilitate this multi-state agreement. And our coordination with New York and all the other states has been phenomenal. I also want to say that a critical part of the hub approach is strong support and engagement from partners, from private partners. And that includes over 100 different partners that have expressed interest in participating in the hub and contributing concepts for specific projects that could be included in the hub. And my favorite as well, significant private matching funds that would be utilized to pair with the federal match that we're going to be seeking. All of the projects must be focused on clean hydrogen. They're required to develop community benefit plans with host communities and advance the federal Justice 40 initiative. So it's great to see those policy priorities that mirror the priorities that we have here in our state around equity and inclusion, environmental justice, workforce development, as well as minimizing greenhouse gas emissions reflected in the proposals. We will hear in the fall of 2023 whether our application is selected. And the hub process is a multi-year process, so there will be multiple phases, and award negotiations would proceed in the winter of 2023-2024. So I do want to say, commending the legislature and my conversations with the other states, I don't think I would be speaking out of turn to share that other states have reported to me like, wow, Connecticut, your legislature is really far ahead on tackling the hydrogen policy issues. So I do want to say, I do want to applaud you, because this is not something to take for granted, that the work that we're doing within the agency and with the Green Bank and so many of our private sector partners and other participants in the task force has been, that there's so much urgency and encouragement from the legislature to work together to ensure that we have a policy environment and that will match and help us be more competitive in pursuing these federal grants. I also want to say, how appreciative we are to have amazing partnerships on the private side and with our research institutions. We're fortunate to have, the partnerships with UConn and others who worked very closely with the task force. President Merrick is, as I think we all know, an incredibly knowledgeable and a thought leader on hydrogen, in addition to just being such an energetic advocate for hydrogen as part of our economy here in the state. And so there's other federal funding opportunities that will be coming. The Hydrogen Hub is obviously taking up a lot of our focus until we get the application in April. But beyond that, we know that there's other funding opportunities coming: hydrogen R&D, manufacturing, commercialization, and innovation centers. We're also eagerly awaiting the details on the tax credits, the production tax credits that the Inflation Reduction Act includes for hydrogen. That's going to be a significant catalyst for driving end uses for hydrogen in the state. DEEP is proud that Connecticut has been providing for incentives for things such as fuel cell vehicles as part of the CHEAPER program. That's had a long history here in our state. We're proud about the our base of manufacturing support for fuel cells in Connecticut. We know how important that is in terms of advancing our knowledge and our ability to deploy electrolysis solutions. This is probably one of the reasons that we do, I think, as we've been engaging with the other states, I continue to find Connecticut in the lead, and we're proud at DEEP to be part of that, and eager to hear any questions you might have about ways that we can continue to support the deployment of a hydrogen economy that's aligned with our policy goals in the state. So with that, that concludes my comments, but I'm happy to hear any questions and participate in the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We really appreciate the work that you and DEEP have done with all the participants here, but we also recognize how important your work has been on a regional basis. If we're going to solve our energy issues in the Northeast, we have to work collaboratively. I will also give credit to my now departed co-chair and the former chair of the committee, Representative Arcani, who teed us up for this and made a lot of this possible. As much as I'm all for collaboration and regional cooperation, I will also get parochial and competitive and suggest that perhaps we need to be a little bit wary of the larger states like New York and Massachusetts glomming on to the most attractive components of a hub. And given our expertise and our distinctive strengths as a state, I'm hoping that we'll also have a Connecticut plan for hydrogen that assures that some of the activity, some of the industry, and most particularly some of the jobs come here to Connecticut and are not just isolated in the states that may be the largest, or we're able to contribute the most staff to the writing of the proposal. How are we going to assure that?
Well, I think, we've heard that loud and clear. I will say that our partnership with the other states has been absolutely essential to being able to get that green light on the concept paper to move to the application phase, because DOE is really looking for regional solutions. But our motto is always, regional collaboration, but we want to seek our unfair share of these federal dollars. And that is, again, I think where the signal that the legislature is sending with your, really leaning in with the task force, and then, collaboration on legislation that can really signal a positive environment for hydrogen investment is really, really important. I think there's some other fundamentals that will serve us well here in the state. Again, that reflect the different configurations for hydrogen deployment that we see evolve and become commercial and commercially viable and cost effective over time. Ultimately, I think we clearly have a massive head start with the fuel cell industry being having such an important footprint here in the state because of what that will mean in terms of increasing demand for electrolysis and fuel cell applications. I think the other opportunities that we have to really lean into relate to having the green energy resources to produce the hydrogen, to plug the electrolyzers into. And so from that standpoint, the work that we're doing on transmission, that could potentially lead to integrating offshore wind to make landfall, at interconnection points here in Connecticut, will be determinative of opportunities to build hydrogen production hubs with green energy in Connecticut's borders. And then beyond that is the end use piece, right? Who's going to consume? Where are we going to use this hydrogen? Are we going to create a policy environment with incentives, tax credits, et cetera? Many of the things that the legislature is looking at now to make it affordable, cost effective for businesses and for end use consumers, right? To invest in equipment and ultimately take advantage of hydrogen end uses. That's really that's one of the really critical barriers that we have to get over. And so I think that's where I point to, here we sit with, think about long distance trucking, right? 95, 91, 84, we have these major corridors passing through Connecticut. So how do we build out locations for fueling that make sense? Our aerospace industry is an incredible kind of unfair advantage to us. As we think about the future of hydrogen for reducing emissions from aviation, the support that we have for our aerospace manufacturers and supply chain to develop those technologies for hydrogen utilization in aviation that can open up markets not only here in Connecticut, but globally. For these technologies is going to be really important. Maritime with our ports, another important opportunity. So those are just a few, not the exclusive end uses that we're thinking about, but these are end uses and industries that the legislature has been working on supporting in many different ways for a long time. And so I think this is really merging the hydrogen opportunity with those kinds of incentives, tax credits, other types of areas of support that will make all the difference in Connecticut getting the unfair share of this hydrogen opportunity, including federal funding going forward.
But let's stick on the fair share. I know that's been used by a different committee for a different reason, but there's also the other side of the equation, which is the investment, the costs that will be required by the state. And we've alluded to the matching funds. Mm-hmm. Let's say that the Northeast is awarded one of the hydrogen hub projects. do we have any sense about what Connecticut's share of the investment capital would be to contribute to that match? How much are we in for, and how much can we expect that our partners might be able to absorb?
So that is not determined yet at this stage as we're racing towards the April 7th deadline for submission. We're still finalizing what the portfolio of projects will be that is included in the hub application. And so I can say, a lot of that information is confidential because we're working with private partners, but I can assure you that we've been very engaged in the regional discussions to ensure that Connecticut partners and Connecticut projects are featured prominently in the sort of, that we have a substantial wedge of that pie of federal match funds that is associated. And really that, I'd like to think that's because, we're really persuasive at the staff level of engaging, but a lot of it really relates to how compelling are the projects that partners, our private partners here in Connecticut have been putting together and submitting into the hub. And so I don't want to take credit for that. I think, again, that reflects how fortunate we are to have such great, visionary leaders and project developers here in the state. So that's sort of the first step. But after we have the hub application submittal, then we'll wait to hear back from DOE, hopefully that will get accepted. And I do want to say, as hard as we're working on this, it is very stiff competition across the country, as many regions and states are really and key members of Congress are very focused on ensuring that there's, they get their hub funded. So we're working hard on that. And there's no guarantee we'll be accepted. But if we are, then that will kick off kind of the first phase of the project negotiation stage with DOE. And that will, as I understand it, we'll be getting feedback and assignments for each of the projects that are included in the hub, where they'll want to see more community benefits agreements worked through and more details on projects. And so that will also illuminate the finalization of the federal funding available. But this is unfortunately characteristic of myself, and I'm sorry, a long-winded answer to your question. What you're really asking is how much match will be required at the state level. And the short answer is, it's hard to say from the Connecticut perspective until we know the final configuration of projects, until we know what DOE is going, whether they're going to approve, how much they're going to approve that will be Connecticut focused. But the good news is that many of the projects that I've seen are relying on shareholder funds or private contributions for the non-federal match. I do commend the legislature. I think that there's valuable foresight in establishing funding sources, including the funding that was voted through, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, to support the University of Connecticut. And I think it would be not credible to say there won't be any state funding that would be valuable to catalyze investment in hydrogen. But at this stage in the hub process, it's a little early to be able to put a dollar figure around it, but creating a mechanism for funding to be determined, or at least having awareness that there will come a point where funding could be really useful, I think is wise to do. And I think some of that funding could even include, thinking about incentives like the cheaper program, like what rebates or incentives we might have for trucking companies to be able to cover some of the upfront costs of purchasing these vehicles. It's those kinds of end user upfront costs that we may want to think about from a tax credit and an incentive level, as well as bond funds, for example, for particular projects.
Thank you for clarifying the timetable, and we recognize you're working on the hydrogen white paper. There's the CES, there's the hub. Let's even put the hub aside because we are into this session. There's certain recommendations the task force has come forward with that they'd like the legislature to act on. But if there is additional funding that needs to take place this year, as opposed to waiting for the results of the hub or the CES, I've not seen anything from the administration yet that's making a specific ask yet for money, but now would be a good time for us to find out if that is going to happen, so that we can partner with you and be advocates with the Appropriations Committee to make sure that happens as part of this year's budget, rather than waiting a year where whatever advantage Connecticut might have as a state will be a little bit less. Senator Needleman.
Good afternoon. just want to inform everybody that we will be having to end this at 1:45 in order to reconvene our committee meeting because Zoom wasn't working properly and we have to redo several of the votes just to make sure that everybody had an opportunity. I do want to thank you, Commissioner, and I appreciate the shout out. Working as a committee with the agencies involved on creating a roadmap for our future has been a really critical part of what we've been doing here. We've been trying to play small ball and long ball at the same time, dealing with some of the issues where we think there are issues with the utilities, but also at the same time, trying to work on a cohesive energy future for the state of Connecticut. And I know you've been instrumental in working on that, as well as all your work regionally. I mean, I think that is kind of a landmark at this point with the governor. Just trying to move the mindset to think collaboratively in the region. So segueing right over quickly, I'm going to ask you what I asked before. Does, I think I know the answer, but is there any path short term that hydrogen plays in dealing with our short-term winter reliability problem?
I think that's a really, that's a question that's really been on my mind as we've been looking at some of the different projects that have been proposed in the hub. You know, I'll just give for an example, LNG, the Everett facility up in Massachusetts, which we know has been supported through an ISO RMR contract that Connecticut ratepayers are paying 25% of to continue the operation of that facility through 2024. I think that facility kind of, I hate to think of where we, might have been this winter without that facility, without Millstone. We need these
David,
this kind of
I could exit. Yeah, and I can exit out, go into that.
Shut down. I've gathered that there are plans for that site already that include a stadium, or maybe they'll get rid of Fenway Park and probably do. No, I'm only kidding. Never. build a second baseball stadium for a better team. No, never mind that. Sorry. Yeah, we'll bring back the Whalers. Yeah. Commissioner, you're out of this conversation. But no, seriously, that's for the next 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, we cannot have the New England grid not have Everett as a backup. There's no way we could withstand a 7-day cold snap, and gambling on the weather is a bad option here. And it's not Connecticut's fault. It's just it's a problem that arrived as a result of a lot of issues. But I think that there's no choice but to find a way for the states to collaboratively do something to keep Everett alive.
I just briefly can assure you that those conversations are happening now among the states. I do feel that there may be some solutions that need to be explored that the ISO and FERC could advance. They are, after all, responsible for reliability, and this is a key reliability challenge. But the discussions are underway, and I couldn't agree with you more about the urgency of having a solution to continue the operation of that facility for these years while we are transitioning our grid to alternative sources.
Thank you. And I know you're working on it. I just wanted to highlight that because we just cannot be at the mercy of the weather, especially given, global warming doesn't mean that we couldn't have 10 days where it's, a high of 10 degrees. That is likely at some point, and we're just running the clock on things like that, and much more severe storms in the summer and winter. So whatever you're doing, whatever we can do to help enable that, I think we've discussed that in terms of some of the bills we have out there that are placeholders to make sure that we address that if you come to us with a proposal.
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. If no one else, I'll just follow up on that a little bit. We're all now very eager to see the advertised white paper on the topic. But let's assume worst case that the hub doesn't come through. Will Connecticut have its own plan for hydrogen that will be independent of whether or not we get the hub?
I was saying to some folks out in the hallway that we want to get to it's like get to the submission on April 7th. And then I think next step is really looking at what are the other federal funding opportunities that are out there. What are the other, policy and incentives that we can help to move forward on hydrogen, as the federal tax credits as well, I think could motivate a lot of interest and investment for hydrogen in the state. So I think that, look, we're eager to, we're working on refining the draft of the white paper, and we anticipate having it out in a matter of weeks, not months. And so eager to move that forward. And hopefully that will be, we'll get feedback on the white paper. Then we'll be able to finalize. I see this as sort of, we're all learning and we're iterating as we go, and we're learning it from our stakeholders. We're learning from private sector partners. There's enormous amount of activity that's going on here. And I think that the dialogue and the leadership with the legislature is critical so that we develop policies that move us forward and don't prematurely cut off certain options, but ensure that things like workforce and equity and environmental justice are considered at the forefront of how we move forward with these policies. So, we're eager to get the white paper out very shortly. No one's more eager than our staff. I will also note that in the governor's budget, there's a proposal for increasing staffing at DEEP, and that reflects as well that, within our state energy office, essentially the Bureau of Energy and Technology Policy, we have been fortunate to have a few staff who've really stepped up to get up to speed and learn about in the hydrogen space, but to really adequately tackle these opportunities, we're hoping to add within that request for increases there's 1 or 2 positions that are keyed towards this hydrogen opportunity, not just the hub, but the other federal funding opportunities. And then ultimately, should we not win in the hub funding, I I can't imagine that we'll see the clock turn back to a standstill. I think we will have learned from the process as well as uncovered and built relationships with partners, right? Such that I think we'll still see a lot of momentum and interest in moving projects forward.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing up the fact that the entire state would benefit if DEEP had the resources to pursue a lot of these grant and other opportunities. If we can connect the dots between an FTE and the benefit to the state in terms of industry and jobs, that would be something that I for one would be glad to take to appropriations to make that case. Because a dollar invested now will have a multiplier effect down the road for us. So I think that's a very wise investment. Just based upon the presentation to this point, we have so much expertise in the room. If there comes a point where we need to get the band back together to have further conversations when we know more, I think that would be a good use of all the energy that's been invested in this to this point. So I really want to thank you for your efforts, and it gives us confidence that we will take advantage of the advantages we have and not miss opportunities. Without anything further, we can now go back to the panel, of which we still have about 25 minutes window. Thank you, Commissioner. We look forward to further conversations on this, and fingers crossed on the hug.
Fingers crossed. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for extending time again so that we could hear that from Commissioner Dykes. So at this point, I'd like to re-invite the panel back up. We have Diganto Chatterjee from Eversource Energy. Unfortunately, Adolfo Rivera from Avangrid had to leave, but we can carry questions back to him. We have Weezy Noir from Dominion. Ben Butterworth from the Acadia Center is still with us virtually, and we have Aziz Dekan from the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. And before I kick it back over, perhaps I'll turn it over to Aaron briefly to discuss, the testimony that we heard before in brief, and how it relates to the recommendations that were in the task force report.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, just briefly, I think wanting to take a minute, to summarize what we've heard from folks and sort of how that ties back to some of the recommendations developed by the task force. But we heard from Diganto about some of the opportunities for maritime, trucking, and industrial heat applications, but also the need for incentives to enable cost-effective adoption for end users. And so that definitely factors into some of these items around potential tax exemptions. We also heard from Adolfo on the need for enabling infrastructure for renewable energy and its interconnection, as well as the policy and regulatory certainty required to enable infrastructure investments. And I think Commissioner Dykes also hit on the need for private capital in this investment process. And we know that some of this regulatory and policy certainty is a big part of folks feeling comfortable putting money into projects. We heard from Weezy about some of the opportunities for nuclear and other existing electric sector resources to support production. But I think this conversation on reliability has also reinforced the complexities of creating space for hydrogen production while continuing to pursue electric sector decarbonization and reliability. We got a great deep dive from Ben on some of the complexities associated with end use applications, especially blending of hydrogen and existing natural gas infrastructure. And so some of the recommendations that we have provided on that front are really intended to create space for stakeholders to dig in with DEEP and other agencies on some of the technical complexities there. And last, but most definitely not least, we heard from Aziz about the opportunity for action to support communities on engaging in hydrogen infrastructure deployment, and also the need for support to help workers meet growing demands for the hydrogen workforce. So as you can see, many of these topics have been showing up in bits and pieces in terms of our recommendations and how we've been proposing that the state make space for some of these conversations and additional resources. But with that, Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So at this time, the panel is happy to take questions. If we could respectfully request, I know Brian has some closing remarks that will take a few minutes at the end. If we could reserve time for that, that'd be great. But
So we can control how much time Brian has for his closing remarks.
exactly.
Okay. let's start with the community benefit agreements. This is a really important part of our overall desire to create jobs in the state. And I note that you want to decrease, as per statute, the project size. This is something that seems to be a broader issue. We had the same issue with the NRES solar program. The smaller projects are getting subscribed while the bigger ones are not. Could you explain a little further why it's so important for us to emphasize 1-2 megawatt scale projects in the context of hydrogen?
Yeah, so there are two pieces of Public Act 2143 that are being suggested for consideration. One is reducing the 2 megawatts to 1 megawatt, and that is simply to be consistent with the treatment of the federal tax credit. So that's what that is. The second part has to deal with adding clean hydrogen projects within the context of community benefit agreements. So the current drafting of 2143 focuses on class 1 resources. What we're suggesting is whatever definition is determined for clean hydrogen projects should require community benefit agreements to all the points that Aziz was making. And I would just say broadly that Secretary Granholm takes great pride in applications, competitive applications coming into the DOE, and literally tracking what % of those applications have community benefit agreements attached to them. So it's now become a fabric of how the DOE assesses projects. And we just so happen to have a bill in place, 2143, on just transition. That is a competitive advantage to Connecticut. So if we can use it that way, then it will only serve to help us.
This reminds me of another question, which is we can enable all we want, but do we have potential partners who are willing to work in these communities to provide opportunities? I think that also maybe applies to our desire to use hydrogen for heavier industries and trucking and the like. Have we done any work in investigating potential partners that companies that might want to convert their fleets, might want to locate in areas where we can be growing jobs in the state? Or is that just the next step after we get through these recommendations?
I think that should be the next step as we hone in on those 3 or 4 use cases. We can do a deep dive on what the market size is. There's some preliminary assessment of what that market size is in the hydrogen task force report. But I think we need to now start really knocking on the doors and understanding those customers' ESG demands and how that aligns with what we can provide for them.
Thank you. I imagine that would also be consistent with our desire to get our fair share if the hub should be awarded to us, is to have specific projects and specific partners identified. Are there other questions? Yes, Representative Piscopo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked a question earlier. I don't think I asked it well. I'll try again. Let me just start with the beginning. Your definition of clean hydrogen, is that hydrogen that's produced without carbonization, solar or wind? Is that your basically what we're doing?
So frankly, there was a lot of debate about what the definition of clean hydrogen should be throughout the task force. And the resolution from the task force members was that that is more of a policy discussion. And so Commissioner Dykes and her team at DEEP are actually now, that's going to be part of the white paper, is a draft definition that can be part of a stakeholder process where people can weigh in. So throughout this process, we thought about hydrogen as far as its carbon intensity, not so much depending on which kind of source it was from, but sort of a more general move towards lower carbon intensity hydrogen.
Thank you. So the reason I asked that is we're seeing electric producers, power plants being built in other countries, putting out quite a bit of power for those countries, hydrogen based. And it's the more I hear of hydrogen, the better it sounds, and it sounds like a great energy source. do we ease into this? It seems like we're almost, we're not just, we could start this. I don't know why we're getting too caught up in the decarbonization aspect of this. If we, well, our nuclear power plants is no carbon, so that would be decarbonization. They're ready to start producing this hydrogen. I guess my question directly would be, why don't we, can't we just build a power plant here in Connecticut, get ahead of the curve, get started on this market, and then as the decarbonization hydrogen starts being produced on a more commercial level, we ease into that, retrofit our plant. Can we? I don't understand why we can't do that. We're doing, we've heard from a lot of people here that are actually doing it for very, very reasonable cost.
Yeah, so Representative, that's why I was trying to focus on the maritime long haul trucking and the carbon intensive heating industries, because the cost point for power generators is about $1 per kilogram. And at that point, it'll be self-sustaining. But from a technology standpoint, turbine companies like Siemens and GE have all committed to a 10-year period of going from natural gas to full hydrogen. Right now, some of the pilot projects that are in Australia, and I believe one in Ohio as well, they're building GE is building the FA class with about 30% blend. And just the way the CO2 emission curves pan out is that about at 50% is when you start to see the real delta reduction in CO2. So there is a pathway within the next 10 years that turbine manufacturers like Siemens, GE, and Mitsubishi can build large power generation that can run completely on hydrogen. In the meantime, they are testing, piloting, just changing the burner, retrofitting those burner tips to be able to ingest a blend of hydrogen with natural gas. So I think from that chronological timeline of adoption of different sectors, if we focus on maritime, long haul trucking, and those heavy carbon intensive industries that use high CO2 emissions for heating applications, and direct our suppliers of producing hydrogen, so the electrolyzer technology, and around that 10-year time frame, something else happens in Connecticut. All the offshore wind comes to fruition. So we would be very well positioned at that point to use offshore wind at scale, produce hydrogen for use for power generators. And that's when we will actually solve our energy security issues. In the meantime, unfortunately, we'll have to think about storage, short duration or long duration storage to protect our critical facilities to the extent winter peak issues exacerbate. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, I think perhaps the break took a little bit of the wind out of our sails. That was not a pun, by the way. We want to thank you, and I was at least semi-serious about the idea of taking full advantage of the superstar brain trust that we brought to bear on this subject. I don't think we can thank you enough for, in a very small time frame, grabbing the ball and really running with it to the point where we have something that we can act on as a state, both in terms of policy, but in terms also of partnering and enabling industry in the state. Connecticut struggles, its economy continues to struggle. We need a differential advantage wherever we can find it. We have certain advantages in the state, and whether or not we're ahead of other states in any sense, it would be foolish for us to squander this opportunity. And I'd love to create new nodes of differential advantage that we can have for decades to come. Let us hope that this task force will set us on that path.
Well, thank you for those remarks, Representative Steinberg. I would thank all of you for assembling this group. It's definitely been a privilege for Sarah and myself to be up here with really the superstars in this industry. I want to thank Stratagen, Erin Childs and her team, who were just incredible. I feel like a month into this process, we had to run a competitive RFP, probably the most competitive RFP we've ever run in the history of the Green Bank. And we found Stratagen, and just such an extraordinary group of people who facilitated and coordinated. So just Erin, thank you to you and your team for all this. Stakeholders, task force members, ex officios, thank you for all of this. So I wanted to end by coming back to the Energy 101 hearing that we had several weeks ago. I had shown this image and wanted to come back to it specifically at this hearing. We're seeing a lot of different things in this image. We're seeing people walk to an event. We're seeing people riding bicycles. We're seeing people on horseback. And yes, that is President Teddy Roosevelt in a vehicle. This is the first presidential motorcade, and it happened in August of 1902 in downtown Hartford, and he is riding in an electric vehicle. So that vehicle was manufactured by Pope Manufacturing. I think the Office of Policy and Management building where they're currently staffed is his old plant that manufactured the Columbia bicycle, which are all the bicycles. And he produced the first 500 electric vehicles and employed thousands of people in downtown Hartford. The Victoria Phaeton, which is that vehicle there, actually traveled 30 miles on a charge. Henry Ford used to visit Pope. Pope liked, Colonel Albert Pope liked Henry Ford. He thought he was very entrepreneurial. He just didn't like the fact that Ford was an internal combustion engine supporter. He felt that internal combustion engines were dirty, polluting, noisy, explosive, and he felt the batteries were the technology. But the course of history, as we know, was very different. But Ford came here because in Hartford, we had a renaissance in manufacturing. We had interchangeable parts, we had precision manufacturing. So he learned from what was happening here. And I say this, I tell this story because if we had known then that it would take 120 years for electric vehicles to finally break through, could Connecticut have done something in 1900 to ensure a place today in this clean energy manufacturing industry? The role of government in technology innovation and diffusion is a complicated one. As we've learned today, Connecticut is a leader in clean hydrogen and fuel cell technology. Now is our moment. Will there be a point in our future where clean hydrogen and fuel cells will be commonplace like we see with electric vehicles today? We don't know the answer to that question, but what we do know is that because of Connecticut's aerospace industry leadership, we now have an ecosystem of clean hydrogen and fuel cell innovation and manufacturing companies. Our technologies provide the power for spaceships by electrolyzing water from solar panels into hydrogen to produce energy that's used in a fuel cell. We don't want history looking back at us in 2020 and asking why didn't Connecticut support its clean hydrogen and fuel cell industry more when it had the chance. So we want to thank you for the opportunity to provide you with this study and look forward to working with you on legislation that advances its recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for that eloquent and appropriate closure. Maybe it's time that we go beyond the nutmeg state. That's not really working for us. Maybe we be known as the hydrogen state going forward. But even though we promise you the last word, as is often the case, Senator Needleman will have the last word.
I love my co-chair. And I do apologize, just trying to get to the nuts and bolts of the committee meeting. Rescheduling has been a little bit trying. I also want to thank you guys for all the hard work. Representative Arcante was instrumental in putting this task force forward and making sure that you guys had the lead on it. I always had tremendous faith in his judgment that we would pull together, you would pull together the best of the best to come up with a plan or at least a roadmap for our future. And working with Deep and the commissioner, I think, and the governor especially, we're going to be leaders in this. I am absolutely convinced. It is interesting that in human history, prior modes of transportation lasted centuries, if not millennia. And the internal combustion engine, as amazing as it was, came and went or will be gone in a century and a half. And with it came great things, like the ability to move people rapidly for long distances. I'm not sure at that point electric could have done that, maybe, but the technology may not have been evolved enough and the cost of doing it might not have worked. But we are at a moment, and the moment is here for us to make great strides, because how we get to the other side of not relying on fossil fuels is going to be really important. But we are at a moment where the technology and our ability to innovate both globally and in Connecticut is with us, and we need to do everything we can to pull out all the stops and make sure that we're leaders in this area, because we have the opportunity to do that. So I'm a big fan of lead by example, and your work here and the work of everybody in this field, including our new president of our flagship university in Connecticut, is certainly a point that we should look at as the new beginning, right? So thank you, and we will continue to work on this with you guys.
Go forth and innovate. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned, and in 5 minutes, we will reprise one last time the committee vote. Thank you again.